Welcome to the Beyond the Food Weight Loss Summit. Get to your optimal healthy weight with holistic strategies and systems. My name is Pamela Pedrick. I am the creator and the host of the summit, and I am a registered nurse and a certified health coach. And I help women who work in healthcare to go from burnt out, exhausted, unhealthily overweight, and eating their feelings to rejuvenated, energized at their optimal healthy weight and no longer eating their feelings. I help them to break the chains of dieting and emotional eating so that they can stop surviving and start thriving. That's right, hashtag freedom. I am the creator of the 3-pillar personalized weight loss method. This summit will help you to save time from doing things that don't work and won't work, time that you can be spending with your precious family and doing the things that you love, and to free you from the endless cycle of yo-yo dieting. So let's get to it. Welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Food Weight Loss Summit. Today's featured speaker is Dr. Jenny Weiss, and we're going to talk about food that is not food. Dr. Jenny started 9 years ago when she had to take a serious look at her health for the first time as she was going through some extreme health challenges. The first thing she had to do was to discover and address the root cause of her symptoms. And she had to admit that it was her own poor choices of what she was eating that had fed the disease that she had wanted to reverse. And she did reverse her major health symptoms 100% naturally just a few short weeks later. And so because of this, she just had to help people with the same amazing information that had saved her own life. And today, her practice focuses on thyroid health, and she is the thyroid expert. So we're talking about food that is not food. Are you eating food or food that is not food? So welcome, Dr. Jenny. So happy and excited to have you here today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Pamela. I'm very excited.
So I'm curious, we shared some of your story, but can you share more in depth, like how you came to do the work that you're presently doing?
Sure. I was definitely raised in the Western side of things. My mother was in the allopathic side. She was a medical pathologist, and that's where I was headed. I was enrolled in nursing school and planned on becoming a nurse when I got very sick and had some very challenging life or death health issues that I just decided I didn't want to deal with in the conventional way with prescriptions and drugs and things like that. I thought there had to be another way, and there was. And after researching and finding out about holistic health and what it really meant to address the underlying root cause symptoms, I did that with myself. And when I saw my own results, I thought I've got to help other people get the same information that did save my own life. So I began a 8.5-year journey to become a traditional naturopath doctor and dropped out of nursing school to facilitate that. So it was definitely not something planned, but I'm grateful for the disease because that set off the path of really discovery and sharing information. So I am passionate about holistic health and food and what real food is, and that's how we kind of got here today.
Awesome. And it's so encouraging because you did reverse it 100% naturally. And you had mentioned, it was in your introduction that it was the food choices. So I'm curious, when we're talking about food that is food versus food that is not food, where do we even get our definition of food from?
Oh, that is a great question. So I used to have my own definition of food, and I thought food was 3 things. I thought food was what was in the food pyramid because it's called the food pyramid. That's where the food is. And I thought that food was in the grocery store because the grocery store is what sells the food. And then I thought the food is what our mothers gave to us growing up. Our mothers, they feed us food. So that was my Jenny definition of food growing up and into college. I thought food was in the food pyramid. Food was sold at the grocery store, and our mothers gave us food growing up. But the issue came when I got very sick, and I got very sick from really my own poor food choices. I thought, what really is food? What's the definition of food, a working definition? Because if something is making us sick, is it actually food? So I opened the dictionary and I used the Oxford Dictionary, which is the world's accepted dictionary, to look up the definition of food. And it says in the Oxford Dictionary that food is any nutritious substance given to a plant, person, or animal that maintains life and growth. So for our purposes, food is any nutritious substance that maintains life and growth. Those are the two characteristics of food. So in order for something to be food, according to the dictionary, it must fit both characteristics of food, of being nutritious and maintaining life and growth. So after we have that basic working world definition of food, we can start applying things to the definition of food. Is a carrot a food? Well, is it nutritious? Yes, there's carbohydrates, macronutrient in carrots. There's beta carotene, antioxidants. Those are proven to bind to free radicals, lower oxidative stress, which is proven to extend lifespan. So yes, carrots do maintain life and growth. Carrots are nutritious and they maintain life and growth. So carrots are a food. You can apply beef or chicken or broccoli, anything to that. And I started applying these foods to the definition of food, and I got to certain foods. And it was interesting because the scientific evidence showed unequivocally that they do not maintain life and growth. And those foods that I got to were grains and dairy, all forms of grains and all forms of dairy. And it was shocking. So if you take dairy, let's say cow's milk, it could be goat's milk or sheep's milk, but let's use cow's milk as an example. Apply it to the two characteristics of food. And is cow's milk nutritious? Absolutely, yes. It contains calcium, other micronutrients, phosphorus. It has fat and protein, so macronutrients. And if it has macro and micronutrients, it obviously is nutritious. So we know that it fits the first part of the definition of food. And then I looked at, well, who is cow's milk for? Who is it for? It is designed by God to change specifically a young juvenile calf into a 2,000-pound bovine that is covered with fur, that has 4 stomachs and moves and is a ruminant, eats grass, and it's designed to do that in a year. What does that in the milk? Well, cow's milk has 35 hormones, the perfect hormones to change a young cow into an adult cow in a year that has 4 stomachs and fur and moves. There's also 11 growth factors, cow growth factors in cow's milk meant to grow a young cow into an adult cow. So what are hormones? Hormones are biochemical messengers that give directions to our body, ways to grow and develop. They communicate and talk to our own system. So we are then getting directions from whatever source the hormones come from. And if they come from a cow, we're getting directions from a cow. So what happens when we start to get directions from a cow and growth factors from a cow? Well, cancers can form. Milk is shown in many studies to be linked to breast cancer, prostate and testicular cancer in men, reproductive system cancers. The Swedish milk study shows that milk leads, in dairy in general, leads to a shortened lifespan and earlier mortality. And even things like broken bones, osteoporosis, and arthritis, which we assume that milk is helping to protect us against. So if there are studies from around the world, like the Swedish milk study and other studies that anyone can look up that show conclusively that milk leads to a shortened lifespan, and if we are getting the hormones, the biochemical messengers from another species, the growth factors from another species, that causes a lot of agitation in our body. It causes an acidic state, and our own body's cells begin to genetically mutate. Our own body cells with genetic mutations, that's how tumors form, actually. And that's how cancer gets started, is our own body cells that genetically mutate. And there's several rounds of that, and they form a tumor. And the hormones from milk can greatly affect the speed at which those tumors grow. So is milk nutritious? Absolutely. It's nutritious for a juvenile cow to grow them into an older cow. Does it maintain life and growth? Absolutely not. So is dairy a food according to the actual definition of food? And then you can apply other things to that definition of food. Dairy, also a specific molecule in dairy, it does something very interesting in the body called molecule mimicry. The molecular structure looks just like the molecular structure of the thyroid. So when we eat, actually gluten does the same thing. Gluten, lactose, when we have dairy and anything in the wheat family, and if there's leaky gut present and that migrates into the rest of the body will go, there's something that's not supposed to be here. Our lymphatic system will try and eat that up, but will miss. And it's a case of mistaken identity, and our body will end up attacking ourselves. That is autoimmunity, autoimmune disease. That's where Hashimoto's thyroiditis and Graves and other immune issues come from. The body attacks itself because there's a case of mistaken identity, and gluten and dairy are the biggest culprit for that. So if it's causing our body to attack ourselves, and there's countless studies that show that gluten is the #1 cause of autoimmune disease, countless. Anyone can read them. And when you apply that knowledge, would you continue to eat something that does not only not facilitate life and growth, but ushers in more quickly death and disease? So, not fitting that definition is something shocking that I discovered because I loved grains and I loved dairy, and I grew up eating those foods, and they were in the food pyramid and they were sold at the grocery store. So there's this kind of paradigm of what we think food is in the actual dictionary definition of what food is. And then biologically, is our body recognizing dairy, if it's shortening its lifespan and committing molecule mimicry, causing autoimmune disease? No, that is the answer. So there are certain things that we think of as foods that are not foods. And it was shocking to kind of discover after reading the dictionary definition and going on this long journey.
And I think a lot of women, okay, they can pretty much understand what's nutritious, especially since we've been dieting since the 70s and 80s, and what's nutritious. But when it comes to the last two parts of what is food, does it maintain life and growth? That's so interesting. When you put it all three together, there's so many foods that are truly not food, big culprit being the grains. And when women start to want to get healthy and lose weight, they start to go towards those foods that truly aren't food. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And I'm curious, you mentioned dairy, you mentioned gluten. Are there other foods that we women are eating that really aren't food, that are either contributing to weight gain or unhealth or disease in our body?
That is a great question. And the three kind of overarching foods that aren't foods are gluten, dairy, and sugars that are not from raw fruit or raw honey. So if it's a processed sugar, it's not a food, it's a cancer feeder. Sugar is proven to cause apoptosis, which is blood supplying tumors and growing blood vessels to tumors. So if something's supplying blood to tumors, it's definitely not maintaining life and growth. Sugar does not maintain life and growth. Any of those syrups, maple syrup, corn syrup, rice syrup, agave syrup, those do not maintain life and growth when applied to the definition of food. Grains as a whole did not fit the definition of food. I know people think of gluten as kind of the big bad one, and gluten, it is kind of the big bad one. It's two plant proteins bound together in a football shaped molecule. It kind of looks like a spear. And it's very interesting what it does, because our small intestine, the lining of our small intestine is made up of one cell wall thick of enterocytes. Those are the cells that line our small intestine. And there's a space in between each enterocyte. They're pressed very tightly together. This space is called the tight junction, and it's meant as a nutrient pathway to transfer nutrients into the system, but not undigested nutrients. That's why it's such a tight junction. They're packed together. Well, gluten, when we eat it and it enters into digestion, this football-shaped molecule that's made from two plant proteins bound together, that's in the shape of a sphere, is perfectly shaped to wedge itself in between these enterocytes, causing a gap. This gap is what doctors will refer to as intestinal permeability or leaky gut. Gluten is the number one cause of leaky gut. Many scientists agree that gluten and glutenoid compounds are the number one cause of leaky gut. So when these enterocytes are there's space between them, there's pathogenic bacteria and parasites and undigested food particles coming through. And most people in the United States do have leaky gut. So then gluten is traveling through our body, committing molecule mimicry. Our body's attacking itself. It's causing leaky gut, definitely not maintaining life and growth. And gluten is found in the wheat family. So we definitely want to avoid wheat and spelt and barley and grains like that. But there is another form of glutenoid compounds, and they're found in really all grains. So there's glutenoid compounds, of which gluten is one, found in the wheat family. There's another one called prolamine. Prolamine is found in corn. It also causes havoc to our system. Avenin is found in oats. And you know, that brand of Aveeno that everyone was washing their face with in the 90s, and it left that slick kind of film, that was the avenin in the oats. That was the plant protein, the glutenoid compound, and it does the same thing to the lining of our intestine. It is slick. So avenin, that protein in oats, still wreaks havoc in our digestion. And horinin is the glutenoid compound found in rye. All grains, even quinoa, have glutenoid compounds. So if something is exacerbating autoimmune disease, if there's molecule mimicry going on, and if there's hormones from another animal, those things aren't maintaining life and growth. They're, hashtag food that isn't food, and following with the dictionary and the biological definition. And really, those are the main foods that aren't foods: grains, dairy, processed sugars. Someone might struggle with beef or might struggle with broccoli individually, but it doesn't mean that those individual food items aren't foods, for most people. So beyond that, it's kind of a case-by-case basis according to genetics and epigenetics, your environment, your biology, your other nutrition, even the home you live in. Lots of things can contribute to if someone is sensitive to a particular food. But those overarching categories are what I have discovered to not be actual foods.
I'm curious, you mentioned, the food that is not food can lead to autoimmune disease, and you'd mentioned some of those. I'm just curious, is there one that seems to be more prevalent as a result of the foods that we're eating?
Yes, the Multiple Sclerosis Society, which is an American society, they even advise on their website for no one with MS to ever consume dairy because it exacerbates and pushes along the disease. And this is, it's finally being admitted. So, multiple sclerosis, lupus, a really common one that we see a lot in practice is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, autoimmune hypothyroidism. And that's the area of specialty that I focus on, and reversing it naturally by addressing the root cause with diet. And oftentimes it's first removing the foods that aren't foods, so the nutritional foods can do their job and heal the body after that inflammation has been removed.
I'm curious, you mentioned Hashimoto's and the thyroid autoimmune with that. Is some of the first initial symptoms women experience with that, is that weight gain, or are there other symptoms that are involved with that?
That's the big one. Weight gain is for sure. Usually right around the middle. There are so many symptoms of Hashimoto's: thinning hair, sometimes Women will lose the outer third of their eyebrows. You might notice a deepening in voice or hair growth or brittle nails. The thyroid is a regulator. It's a master regulator of the body. So one of the things it regulates is metabolism. So you might notice your digestion is off. It regulates heartbeat. You might notice heart palpitations. It regulates bone growth. So you might notice some pains and some aches and even muscle movement. Cognition, it helps along with the adrenals to regulate that fight or flight response. So stress, and that's related to cortisol, and it works. The thyroid really works with the pituitary and the hypothalamus as an axis, and then the pituitary and the adrenals as a separate axis. And between these two axes, it kind of controls our body's function. So if something isn't functioning, the better thing to do, rather than looking at that organ as seeing it as a sick organ, is looking holistically and saying, what regulates that systemically? And it is the endocrine system. The endocrine system is our body's hormone dispersal system, and hormones, like we learned before, are biochemical messengers that give our body directions and ways to grow and develop and utilize things also. So a woman might notice thinning hair, brittle nails, weight gain around the middle, brain fog, extreme fatigue, irregular sleep patterns, irregular menstrual cycles, everything from constipation to diarrhea. If you're off in one area of the body, you tend to be off in other areas of the body because the body's connected to the body. We're all one whole person. So, the thyroid is connected to the digestive system, is connected to the brain, is connected to our musculoskeletal system. It really is all connected. So many common symptoms that we associate with a variety of things. If someone is experiencing hair loss, they might, start upping their shampoo to a higher end brand or taking vitamins, when really the core underlying issue of why it's happening in the first place isn't being addressed. And because it's not being addressed, it will always be there, and anything will just be a Band-Aid slapped on top of it instead of addressing the why. It will never be, cured or reversed, and it will just, be kind of trapped in that cycle.
For the woman who's watching right now and going, you just described me when you're describing the symptoms of Hashimoto's, what would be a good first step or next step for her?
The very first, most beneficial next step is to remove the foods that aren't foods. That would be the best investment, honestly, you can make in your health, even more than adding in super nutrient dense foods, because if you're adding in super nutrient dense foods, but that inflammation is still there, they're not going to really, those nutrients and super nutrients aren't going to be able to do their job, because everything's going to be blocked and clogged with inflammation. The inflammation must be removed first, following it in a succinct order, kind of, first principle of holistic nutrition is removing the inflammation. So if you're following the 3 principles of holistic nutrition, principle number 1, removing inflammation. Principle number 2, introducing nutritious foods. So that way, principle 3 can happen, which is that the body must cleanse first before it rebuilds. The body cannot rebuild if it's a dirty body. If we're remodeling our house, we should start with a clean house, not a dirty house, or else the project won't really go very well if there's clutter and dirt everywhere. So definitely focusing on those principles of holistic nutrition. The best thing to do is to first remove foods that are not foods from your diet. All grains, processed sugar that does not come from raw fruit or raw honey, and dairy. And then beyond that, kind of, being your own health advocate and looking into what else you might be sensitive, moving. But definitely the foods that aren't foods is the number 1 tip for everyone.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that. And so we talked about foods that aren't foods, but what are foods that actually fit the definition of food? Which ones of those are the best for us to consume?
Really, it does depend on the person, because we're all so individual. So when we think of superfoods, we think of blueberries and kale. And blueberries and kale are great. They're great for me. But actually, my last patient that I was just on with before even this interview, she has an allergy to blueberries and kale. She can't have blueberries or kale. So for her, blueberries and kale cause inflammation. For most people, they don't. But for her, it's a food that isn't food because it causes inflammation. So, things that are good for us, brightly colored foods. Brightly colored foods, that bright color is a pigment. We think, what are antioxidants? They're bright colors in our foods. So antioxidants are fruit pigments, the orange pigments that we see in carrots, carotene, we think of that, carotenoids, and then the green pigments that we see in leafy greens, that's chlorophyll, and then flavonoids are darker pigments, purples and reds that we see in blueberries and pomegranates. But these antioxidants are all different colors, and the antioxidants will bind to free radicals in our body, neutralizing them from doing damage to our body and lowering oxidative stress. So to lower oxidative stress, eat dark, bright color foods. This is a general list of foods, but things like pomegranates, blueberries, kale, carrots, bright red apples, blackberries, raspberries, dark mushrooms, the brown mushrooms, turmeric. Those kind of darker foods tend to have more nutrition than lighter foods like cauliflower, iceberg lettuce, white onions. Not that those are bad foods, they're not. And you can rotate foods, but if you're asking what are the most nutrient dense foods, the dark colored foods in the produce section. And, as far as food goes, all fruits, all vegetables, all meat, all seafood, all nuts, and all seeds are food. They fit the definition of food. So within that, those thousands of things, what works for you might work differently for someone else. But in general, the darker color, the more antioxidants that food will have, and the more oxidative stress it will reduce in the body. And stress is one of the number one risk factors for disease. So then you're reducing one of the number one risk factors for disease. And then you're also raising immunity, because if you have high stress, you're also not going to have high immunity. So it's great to eat antioxidants to lower stress and raise immunity.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. And so I'm thinking about everything that happened last year. Lots of women are stressed. And I'm sure, some women were saying, I just ate and ate and ate because I was in lockdown. I'm curious, have you been seeing a little bit more of the issues that come from eating food that's not food?
Yes, definitely. I mean, as time just progresses in society, I think people are drawn to that fast food lifestyle, so to speak. And it is convenient, but with that education piece, and that's what I work with my patients, is educating them on quick food, doesn't have to be fast food, and something could be quick and healthy. You can open a container of organic hummus and dip an organic stick of celery in it. That's fast food, but it's going to have a different effect on your body, than waiting at a McDrive-through. So it really is a mindset thing. If someone has a desire to change, which that's the first step of wellness success, they can move towards that direction of health and eating healthier food. And that's kind of been a trend the last couple of years, is holding patients' hand and sharing that there are plenty of delicious foods that we can have. And just by avoiding these couple, I call them beige foods, because there's not a lot of color in grains or dairy anyways. That's why I wrote the book Beige Foods to Avoid, which is a free gift, actually, I believe, for this. So it is something that we're seeing more women with weight gain because of quarantine, because of just eating their feelings. It happened with me too. It can happen with anybody. Nobody's perfect. I had some weight to lose after I actually myself, I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's important to be, real. I gained 44 pounds in a 9-month period. And I was like, I can't be a fat naturopath and helping people. And you know what I ate? I ate some foods that weren't foods. And I had to stop eating those foods and follow the principles of holistic nutrition. And the weight fell right off in a few months, because I just, one, had to stop eating those foods that weren't foods and eliminate the inflammation. 2, introduce nutrition, and then my body cleanse and rebuild. And that's the same with everybody. It's that same succinct order, and following that order is really, what ushers in health and what the women are doing in our practice. So, whether they gained a few pounds or, more than that, that's okay. And the key is having the desire to change, having the desire for a healthier future. That's the most important thing, is that. So definitely, if, someone is looking to address weight gain, following the principles of holistic nutrition, of eliminating the foods that aren't foods, and then introducing healthy foods according to what their body can tolerate and need, and then their tissues will rebuild and regenerate new, built on those building blocks of the vitamins and minerals and proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and antioxidants and enzymes that were there in the foods that were foods.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenny. Do so appreciate it. And so, Dr. Jenny, do you have any last words or words of encouragement before we go?
Sure. And this is something that I get to share with my patients, but it is important that you don't have to make time for your wellness. Just make wellness fit your time. You don't have to eat 3 organic, made from scratch meals a day. Some people can eat 1 big, giant, healthy meal that day. Some people drink 3 smoothies in a day. Some people eat, raw. Some people eat more meat. The key is eating really foods that are foods, and you can make that framework fit your life. It doesn't have to be a big chore. I usually spend 10 minutes a day or less cooking completely organic for my family of 3, and it's because I meal prep for 1 hour once a week, and I just make wellness fit my time. Instead of having to work all my time around all this wellness, and it has become, really seamless. So that's one thing that we help our patients do, and just to not eat food that isn't food.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenny. Do
Thank
so
you.
appreciate
Thank you for
it.
having me. Thank you.
To your health, and we'll catch you on the next episode.